Support independent media by becoming a paid member of Democracy Docket. The link is above and in the show notes below. Congress has sent a new bill to Joe Biden's desk that would expand the number of federal judges, but he has said he's going to veto it. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. Last week, Congress passed the Judges Act, which would add 63 new federal district court judge seats across the country. Now, Marc, before we get into Biden's veto threat, why is this bill necessary? What prompted a bipartisan group of senators to introduce it and to get it through Congress?
Yeah, so in many respects, this bill, the Judges Act, is a microcosm of everything you need to know about the two political parties. So the fact is, we have had a backlog of cases in the federal court system now for years. The Federal Judicial Conference, which is like, think of it as like the trade association of judges, they have been asking for additional judgeships to be created in the federal judiciary for quite a number of years. And that's because they're needed. Like, I'm going to be the first one to say to everyone, we actually do have a shortage of federal judges in this country. And Democrats, being the responsible party, they said, okay, let's do the right thing. Let's create more federal judicial vacancies. There was some haggling about where they would be created. Would they be created in red states and blue states and which districts, right? There was some of that, but by and large, Democrats lined up and said, yeah, this is a good thing to do. And as you point out, there were some Republican senators who got on board this, largely because senators have a lot of say over who gets nominated in the judicial districts at the district court level where they sit. So in the Senate, it had more of a bipartisan role. But here's the deal. When it went to the House, the Republicans didn't want to do it. Why? Because Joe Biden was president. And even though this bill wouldn't take effect until 2025, at that point, before the election, good chance Joe Biden would win re-election. When he dropped out, good chance that Kamala Harris would win re-election. And the Republicans in the House, like the Republicans always think, is we don't want to do anything, even if it's good for the judiciary, even if it's good for democracy, that might have the effect of benefiting Democrats in any way, shape, or form. So they blocked this until, guess what? The election of Donald Trump. So after Donald Trump became the president-elect after the November election, all of a sudden, Republicans in the House changed their tune. So all of a sudden, this bill that had passed the Senate months and months ago, that had been sitting before the House, in which Speaker Johnson had no interest in pushing forward. Now, all of a sudden, House Republicans pushed it forward on December 10th, and the bill passed. So that's why we are where we are. And I want to offer that context page because, again, I have been among the voices saying we need to expand the federal judiciary. For all of the discussions about the U.S. Supreme Court and what reforms there need to be done there, and people talking about expanding the size of the Supreme Court, I've said, like, one of the reasons to expand the size of the Supreme Court is not just because of whatever partisan effect it would have, but because you actually would allow the justices to hear more cases, right? There's a backlog. They take too few cases, and expanding the Supreme Court would benefit that. And I've always said, and that is also true of the lower courts. Like, there is a overall lack of capacity in the federal judiciary to hear and decide cases in a prompt manner, in a manner that would allow people who are litigants to get resolution to their cases in a reasonable amount of time. So that's been my position. I think that that's actually has been Joe Biden's position. But, it is one thing to have that position before the election. So, you don't want to reward bad behavior. In this case, it's not just bad behavior, it's terrible behavior. Just remember, it was the Republican Party that when there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court, when President Obama was the president, Justice Scalia passed away, that they held up Merrick Garland, who was Barack Obama's replacement nominee. They held him up without even giving him an opportunity for a vote. Okay, they just said, no, we're not going to fill this vacancy because even though this vacancy took place months before the election, we're not going to let a Democrat fill that seat. We're going to roll the dice and see what happens in 2016. And if Hillary Clinton loses, we'll let Donald Trump fill that vacancy. Well, what happens next? When Justice Ginsburg passes away very close to the election, And now they're afraid that actually Donald Trump could lose the election and Joe Biden would nominate a replacement. They rushed the nomination through, right? So Republicans have been playing games with the judges and the justices simply for partisan advantage. So even though I support a broader judiciary, it is not acceptable to wait to reward Republicans for constantly gaming the presidency in an effort to gain advantage.
And Marc, as we've seen, presidents and political parties can have a huge role in shaping the judiciary and nominating and confirming these judges. I mean, we have federal judges currently sitting in courts across the country, hearing cases, deciding cases that were nominated by President Ronald Reagan and are still here long after Reagan has left office. It is, which we could do a whole other video about how long judges stick on courts and like maybe there should be mandatory retirement ages. But beyond that, it is becoming more of a partisan game of where you file to get what judge. I mean, take Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk in Amarillo, Texas, for example. He's in a single judge district, meaning that if you file a federal lawsuit there, you're going to get Judge Kacsmaryk to hear it. And he has sided with Republicans time and time again, to the point that Attorney General Ken Paxton of Texas has continually filed new lawsuits there, even though you would say Amarillo, Texas isn't really the epicenter of where things are happening in the state.
Yeah, and it's not just, by the way, the Attorney General of Texas who files there. I mean, we have seen private corporations that really have no connection to Amarillo, Texas, private plaintiffs, ideological plaintiffs who are looking to restrict, contraception or advance some other agenda that really are sort of manufacturing. I'm not saying illegally manufacturing, but they are going out of their way to create a nexus to Amarillo simply to file before this one judge. And Democracy Docket covered a few months ago, there was an effort led initially, I think it was by Senator Schumer in the U.S. Senate, and then others to also try to ban that practice of sort of judge shopping to single judges, single judge divisions to game the assignments. And, I encourage everyone, if you're not already, to subscribe to Democracy Docket and get its free daily and weekly newsletters. The link is above or in the show notes below. But one of the reasons why Democracy Docket covered this at the time is that it is another way in which Republicans have gamed the system. So there's the way they have gamed the Supreme Court. There's the way in which they have gamed by choosing where they file. And now you have this situation, Paige, where a law that could have been enacted before anyone knew what the outcome of the 2024 election was, right? When the veil of ignorance, to use John Rawls's phrase, was still in front of our eyes as to what the outcome of the election would be. But they didn't want to take that chance. And so good for President Biden saying he's not going to allow the gaming of this system. He's not going to be a participant in it, and he's going to veto it. And I hope that Democrats, when this comes back up, they don't reward, even though, again, this was a well-meaning bill, they don't reward Donald Trump. And Paige, there's one other aspect of this. I mean, look at what we're seeing, how the Republicans are lining up around confirmations. And that's another dimension that I think has gone undiscussed. The Senate role to advise and consent applies to cabinet officials. It also applies to judges. And if Republican senators are not going to apply the advice and consent role in a serious way to prevent the likes of Kash Patel or Pam Bondi or, Hegseth at DOD or Tulsi Gabbard, then Lord knows when it came to judges who they would be like, fine, like Donald Trump wants them, and we're just going to rubber stamp.
For sure, because there's just so many more judges to get through the confirmation process. You can't give them all of the extensive and careful consideration you would give to those top cabinet level positions. There's just not enough time and not enough people in Congress to get it done. But Marc, I want to go back to something we talked about when it comes to judge shopping, because every time we talk about it, we get the comments, we get the responses of like, okay, who cares? Like Democratic groups file lawsuits in favorable jurisdictions all the time. But I want to make that distinction between forum shopping and judge shopping. And it's something we've touched on before. And correct me if I'm wrong, because you are the lawyer here, Marc, that forum shopping is when you generally file a lawsuit in what you think may be an area where you could get a judge who is sympathetic or favorable to you. But it's still a randomization assignment of the case. You don't know what judge you're going to get. Anyone could get assigned within that district or area. But judge shopping is when you know exactly what judge you'll get. So you go specifically to that place to file, regardless of really what the connection of that place is to your case.
Yeah, and it has to do with something that sounds very technical, but is very important for people to understand. The difference between judicial districts and judicial divisions. Okay, so within a district, you will have multiple judges. The thing is, though, within a single judicial district, like, for example, the Northern District of Texas or the Southern District of Texas, right? It's a big state. And within that within that district, you have judges who sit in different courthouses. So let's just take as an example, Texas and Amarillo. Amarillo is in the Northern District, okay? But there are dozens of judges in the Northern District of Texas. It's a large district. So if you file the case just generally, that could be heard in any division, then as you say, you get random assignment. But if you establish venue that is just in Amarillo and you target it to be heard by the judge who sits in Amarillo, then you wind up in a different situation. And so that is why there is actually a relatively easy fix to this, which is to simply say, random assignment always has to be by district. And so look, yeah, you might have some plaintiffs who are inconvenienced because they are closer to Dallas than Amarillo or closer to Amarillo than Dallas, and their case will be assigned to a judge in a courthouse that is further from them. But that's just okay relative to the other choices. The other choices of allowing this forum shopping is really where you have single judge divisions is really problematic. Of course, the other thing you could do is you could just say, look, if you have a division that only has a single judge, you are probably too small a division to have a single judge, right? So you could also just say, look, we're not going to have single judge courthouses. Now that would be, I think, a much bigger problem or cause other problems, including, enough courthouses, enough courtrooms and the like. So I'm not advocating that, but this is a solvable problem in the modern era, and one that really needs to be solved. But again, getting back to this new law, this Judge Act, getting back to this new bill, this Judges Act that is now going to President Biden, it again is a very, very sensible solution to a very real problem. But in a world in which the Republicans never act in good faith, it is really hard to craft a solution around something like this. In a world in which you have arsonists and you have firefighters, it is really hard to find a good faith compromise. And when it comes to democracy, that's what you have. You have the arsonists and you have the firefighters. And so, again, no criticism to the Democrats or even the Republicans in the Senate who supported this bill in its first iteration. But I stand with Joe Biden in not allowing this to go forward. Thanks for watching this episode of Democracy Docket. Please make sure you're subscribed to its free daily and weekly newsletters. And if you want to do more than that, you can become a premium member. The links are in the show notes below.